Thank you for coming on my podcast and sharing your story with other listeners of just your testimony. So, if you like to begin, I'm just here to listen and um, let you spill out your wisdom. Where would you
Okay.
like to start?
Um, let's start with why I booked the podcast. Like
Yes.
why tell the story? And I've been doing a lot of thinking about that. First, my name is Shauntelya Weaver. And I'm originally from Oregon, and I currently live in Germany with my family. I've done a lot of different things in my life. I've had a lot of different career paths before I found the one that I'm currently on. And I think that that's part of the reason why I'm in a position or a point in my life where I want to tell my story. I think the career path that I'm currently on prompted me to do a lot more healing. And
Mm,
part of doing that healing is telling your story to other women and talking about it and talking about my story and talking about how I overcame it. I coach. I'm authoring a book. Part of the stuff that I talk about, part of the things that I coach about is I coach on boundaries. I coach on vulnerability. I coach on emotional growth and development. I coach on women connecting to their passion, figuring out who they are, what their identity and what their beliefs are. These are all things that I coach on. And I coach on them is because this is stuff that I had to go through. I had to grow through these things. I come from I come from the capital in Salem, Oregon. I come from Salem. I grew up hiking, hunting, camping, fishing, crabbing, biking, all of that. I was actually born in Arizona. When I was a little girl, my parents wanted to escape the poverty of their lives in Oregon. They did what a lot of people, what I assume is more common in certain parts of the country. They sent us to go live with my siblings and I only want to tell my story, but I do have siblings. They sent us to go live with a relative. And I think that that's common in the Caribbean culture. Like people from the Caribbean, they do end up like going off to live with a relative. So they sent me and my siblings off to go live with a relative.
How
This
old were
didn't,
you? Sorry.
I was about maybe 4, I want to say in between 3 or 4. I had to
Yeah.
be like 3 or 4. I was pretty young.
Mhm.
3. I was 3 because I had my 4th birthday while I was there.
Oh.
And the person that we went to live with was not a nurturing person. She was my grandmother. I'll just tell you, my grandmother she was not a nurturing person. My parents made that decision because when we were living in Oregon, and my memory goes back really far, I remember moving from house to house to house to house. Like we never stayed in one place very long. Wherever we lived was always clean because my mom cleaned all the time. But I remember that there were always problems with like spiders or bugs or something in all the houses. Because when you live in poor places, there usually are issues that come along with poor places. We lived in place to place to place. And that's because my parents were struggling to make ends meet. And to get out of that poverty, they wanted to move away from Arizona and they wanted to move to Oregon where they felt like they had better opportunities. One of the options that they picked was sending us ahead of them. They sent us ahead of them, sent me to live with my grandmother. During that time that I stayed with her, she was definitely not a nurturing woman by any means. She was the kind of woman who picked a
Mm.
favored those favorites, and she picked a child that she liked the least. She happened to pick 2 children that she liked the least. She picked me. I'm just going to talk about me. I was one of the ones that she didn't like. And she didn't like me because I looked like my mother, and
Mm.
she hated my mother. And
This
she
was
would
your
tell me,
father's mom or your mother's mom?
this is my mother's mom.
Oh man. So generational curse
Yeah.
breaking. That's literally, you're doing it, girl. Yes, I'm sorry. I just get excited about these stories, but yes. Okay.
So
Wow.
yeah, well, yes, and I don't want to speak a little. She has since passed, but this is also my part of the story to tell. She has since passed.
Yeah.
And she used to tell me when I was younger that she hated me
Oh.
and that I wasn't going to amount to anything using other choice words. I wasn't going to amount to anything. I wasn't going to be anything because my mother wasn't anything and she hated my mother and I was just like my mother. I remember being hungry. I remember being dirty. I remember being so hungry. There were points in time back in the day, they used to get the ads in the paper, the Sunday paper. They were like penny ads. They were like the little, the little ads where you would get like the discounts from the grocery store. The grocery stores would send out the ads. I want to call them penny ads, but they were like the little discount ads, and they would have pictures of food items in there. I was often so hungry that I would rip out the pictures of the food in that Sunday ad section, and I would eat it and pretend like it was real food, so that I would have the feeling of fullness in my stomach. One of my career paths, one of the career paths that I took was teaching. I taught, and I have a deep love and respect for teachers. And when children are able to start school, they do get an opportunity to escape their abusers. I never got a chance to start school, but some of my siblings did. So I was often stuck at home with my abuser, and I caught all of the wrath that went along with that. So I stayed hungry, I stayed dirty, and I stayed unhappy, and I could never understand why, like what was wrong with me that she couldn't love me, that she told everybody terrible things about me. Like what was wrong with me? Why was I so unlovable? And what was it like? What did I need to do to be like my siblings to secure that affection? One of the things that she would do, and I don't want to like traumatize anybody with this story because I have like
No, it's
more
not.
to.
It's beautiful. It's just I'm like, give that's a lot. That's a lot. I almost like need to pause and breathe for you, like, because I every
And
time someone tells me the story, I have kids their age, so I picture that, like, like I could never, and just that's what makes me very emotional because you were only 3 going through that,
yeah,
and like, 3
I was
now.
really, I was very little. I was very little and didn't understand. And I missed my mother, and I didn't understand why I was there and why we had to be there. And whenever I got on the phone with my mom, yeah, I was so happy to talk to her. I would just tell her everything was okay, that everything was wonderful, and that we were fine, and that I missed her, and just hurry up and come see me. And that's if when children are going through something, when they get around the person that they love, they're not, oftentimes they forget about what they endured. They are so ready for the person that they love that they forget about their abuse and their abuser for that moment in time. A lot of times people ask, well, why didn't you say anything? Why don't kids say anything? They're with the person that they want to be with. What they will often say is, don't leave me. I want to be with you. Take me with you. Because those are that child's immediate needs. So when I did talk to my mom, that would be what I would express. Come get me. I want to see you. My mom would ask, are you okay? Is everything okay? At that particular moment, I'm on the phone with her. Everything was okay at that particular moment, but I wanted her to hurry up and come. There were lots of awful, I could go on and on with the stories about things that happened, but I do want to press upon one thing that really shaped me, and shaped things to come later while I lived with my grandmother. It was the use of isolation in my early childhood, isolating me from my siblings, isolating me from other family members, keeping me off to myself. Whenever I got in trouble or she thought that I had done something wrong, one of her the beatings, going out and getting a switch off a tree or whatever else she picked out to hit us with, the pain of that was always temporary. Like as soon as the welts went down, or as soon as that ended, like you could get over it. I could get over it. I could move on and go play and forget about it. It was often the pain of being isolated or hungry, or the combination of both, that was unbearable. And this was one of the ways that she would kind of, she would let it hit home that I was not wanted, and that whatever I had done had taken it to a whole other level. And I remember that I used to sit up at the top of the stairs. She had a 3-level home, and the attic space is where I and my siblings slept. We slept in the attic space she had converted and put bedrooms up there. And everybody would be downstairs, and sometimes she would have gatherings, and the house would smell of food. There would be a whole bunch of people there. The house would be full of people, and I would sit at the top of the stairs, and I wasn't allowed to turn any lights on, and I was stuck in the attic, and sometimes this punishment would last more than a day, and I wasn't given any food. And nobody was allowed to give me any food either. And it was I would almost say that was worse than any physical punishment. It was the isolation, and that isolation, like the way that you are treated in childhood is the way that you learn to see yourself the way that your abuser sees you. It didn't occur to me to like hate her or to see her as wrong or to see anybody who had mistreated us. I thought that they were being mean. But at the end of the day, I had internalized what was happening, and I thought that something was wrong with me, that I was wrong. And so I began to accept some of the things that they were saying about me. And as I got older, like at each year of my life, anytime something happened, I was still that little girl at the top of the stairs in the attic. I still self-isolated. I still kept myself. I still repeated all the same mantras about I wasn't ever going to be anything. I was useless. I wasn't going to amount to anything. All these things that I had been conditioned to believe. I believed. This makes me emotional sometimes.
I know,
Too.
like I don't pause. That is so much.
It does get heavy.
It should, yeah. Every
It
time, that's
does.
why I say healing is lifelong, because when it comes up, like allow yourself to cry and feel all the great things. But I know we have to share these stories, so we have to get through them. But that is some deep wounds that I resonate with, that that internalizing, that neglect, from a neglect and emotional abuse. And
Mhm.
people don't ever want to admit that, like, oh, my grandmother was an abuser, or my mother was because of those titles. And so we steer away from telling these stories for so long that they're just like, I really went through that. Like, it was so normalized, like we
And
could
it
just
was
say it.
normalized. It
Yeah.
was. I will tell you that like there are certain circles of people that I could sit around and make jokes about this, and everybody would laugh and move on because it's like shared trauma. Like it's like
Yeah.
people have experienced it. It's not that big of a deal. But like when you finally want to move on and be happy, you have to like scratch the surface, start digging
These
through
are
some
the
of the
big deals. This is a big deal. These are so
stuff.
deep wounds. In order to be our full selves and do some, like you said, self-discovery and some and learn what our learned behaviors are, our learned traits, and try to rewire that is hard. So, I mean, I
Really
don't know.
does.
I am so proud of you for getting on this journey to even know these things. Like, you are so wise because of your experience. And wow, girl, like, and
Mhm.
I can edit this part out, but how old are you?
I turned 43 in a couple of months.
Wow. You're going to help so many women, because not everyone's there yet to even go back and say, I was abused or these things happened to me. I always got just push it at your feet or give it to Jesus. And it's like, what are we giving to him? What we need to understand what we're feeling.
And this is something that I had to learn to grieve.
Mm,
Some people can forgive. They just can just decide to forgive. I still feel like those people grieve later. They make the decision to forgive and then they grieve later. Outwardly, they show the person compassion, but they continue to suffer. That was never the process for me because I was so deeply hurt in my childhood. When things happen to me, I have to grieve it before I can offer anybody forgiveness.
mm,
And grief isn't linear.
yes.
It's not like one day I may be okay and then something may come back up and I may have to grieve all over again. And what I learned over my lifetime and in my relationship is because everybody grieves differently. And then some people don't grieve at all, especially people who don't grieve. They often don't understand why you keep bringing up what they feel like is the past. And a
Mm,
lot of times it's because you're still grieving
yes.
that pain.
Yes.
you still don't feel safe. You're still grieving the pain. You still feel like maybe something had happened or you haven't come to terms with it. For me, grieving and healing are synonymous. They go hand in hand. You have to do both. And I had to grieve that little girl at the top of the stairs. I had to grieve my childhood. I had to grieve the grandmother that I thought I wanted. I had to grieve parts of my relationship with my mother, my father, my brothers and my sisters, multiple people in my life in order for me to sit here today and even have conversations with other women about what they go through. I
Yes.
had to grieve.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, healing is hard. This is hard work to be a healer and coach. I do coaching as well. So I know. I know like if we go through it too and then living through our clients like experiences with them too. It's like we got to take that back and kind of heal and separate so we aren't trauma bonding, you know what I mean? So we
Yes,
are it's hard work. It's hard work.
truth. There's a lot of truth to that. There's
Yes.
a yes, yes, yeah. I had shared some other things um with you as well. And in those aspects of my story, like I really strongly feel that things that you go through in your early childhood do set you up for patterns of behavior as you get older. Um, and it was definitely the patterns of behavior that I wanted to break as I got older. I definitely saw that I had created a pattern of wanting to remember when I told you I would look at my grandmother and I would think, who do I need to be for her to love me? How can I just be enough or good enough? The beginning of a pattern.
Yeah.
I was willing to suffer more in order to win her affection and her love, to let some of that pain and hurt stop. I didn't see her as the bad person. I thought I needed to change. I needed to do more. I needed to give more.
It grew
And in
such
doing so,
insecurity, I feel like going through that because I have the mother wound, so I had to heal through that. And it's like the insecurities that I look back on, I was like, I'm turning 30 this year, and I'm like, I spent my whole life being stagnant because I didn't want to look at those because I'm like, it's my mom, it's who I envisioned um to self-soothe everything she wasn't. So I was like lying to myself. So when I confronted that and it's like, no, she did, and started labeling it for what it was. How did you know that you needed healing from your past? Like what came up where you're like, I need to go back and do and do some reliving?
I knew it. I when I was 8 years old, I had started self-harm. I'd started self-harming at 8. It became like a regular thing. I always knew, um, I always knew that that something was missing, that something was wrong, and think that things could get worse. I was always desperate to feel better, to be better. Going to therapy for a lot of African Americans is a big no-no. Like, you don't, what happens in your home stays in your home. And a lot
I
of people,
yes. I said that the last podcast, literally.
yes,
Yeah,
it's true.
it is our culture, right? Like, no, no. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
I I I wasn't as a young child in school, I wasn't coping. I knew enough not to talk about certain things in my home, and I started seeing the counselor or therapist at school on a regular basis. And I remember this woman would get emotional, and she tried to hide that she was crying. But I couldn't, I didn't have the ability to like have that kind of compassion for myself. Like I could not cry for myself. I'm like, what is wrong with her? like, I'm
Right.
like,
Like,
lady, I'm trying to tell you this story. And she's just like, oh my God, this is terrible.
right. That reminds me, have you seen Puss in Boots? Because I have a 2-year-old, the cat with the sword. So
Yes.
there's this scene they're walking through like this pocket full of daisies, like scene with the smaller dog, and he starts to tell the story, like, and he's just so cheerful and happy. And he's like, I was a puppy and my owners put me in a sock and put a brick in it and threw me in the lake. But silly them, I got a good sock out of it. And then Puss in Boots is like this, and his girl are like, that is the saddest story. And he's just
Yes.
smelling roses.
Like the dog, sorry, is in like denial. He's
Yeah, the whole time.
completely cannot see the real situation. Well, you want to know, and we put on rose-colored glasses a lot of times to be able to cope with things that had happened to us. Well, I definitely did. I put on those rose-colored glasses, but I always knew the question that you asked, I knew very early that it could, like, I didn't, whatever I thought the bottom of the barrel was for me emotionally, I didn't, if I thought I was close to it or I had hit it, like it felt terrible and I wanted to come out of it. So when there was an opportunity to connect to someone, I would talk, but I always knew what I wasn't supposed to say. But it was never enough to pull me out of the dark hole. It was never enough to get me all the way out and make me all the way whole and make me well, but it was enough to get me through my school years. I still got in trouble. I was still promiscuous. I still had a lot of issues as a teenager. I entered into my first abusive relationship at 16. Eventually I went on I went into the Army. There was a lot of trauma associated with being in the Army, just kind of being ill prepared at that time to like, when you go into the Army, you're in the world. I was not prepared for the world. I think I had been a victim of so much that it was easy to make me a victim once I got in the Army. And I was not ready for that. I joined during wartime. Even if you start off being a good person, you can go to war, see horrible things. You're not going to come back the same. And war created a lot of terrible people at that particular time. And it is my sincerest desire and prayer that the individuals have healed, they have gotten peace, and they have come out of that, and they are now whole people who are behaving better in the world. But at the time when I had encountered some of these people I was meeting in the military, they were looking for a victim, and I looked good. I looked good, and so I endured things there too. I had. It was almost like I'm a firm believer in this. If you're ignorant of something, you truly do not know. But the moment that you realize something about yourself, about how you're behaving, about a pattern that you have in your life, a tendency that you owe it to yourself. You absolutely owe it to yourself to evaluate that, to look at it, and to try to figure out what it is that you can do to make your situation better. Do you need to stop doing what you're doing? How can you stop doing what you're doing? Can you shift some things so that you're doing whatever it is that you're doing less? How can you self-assess? And one thing that I always did was I always self-assessed, and sometimes to the point of blame. But I do feel like that strong desire to assess how did I contribute to the situation also always helped me. I was an extremely self-aware person. I would ask myself, Shauntelya, you keep getting into these situations where you end up being a victim. What is it that you're doing? What kind of behavior that you're doing? I can't take responsibility for somebody choosing to do something to me, right? If they're deciding to do something to me, but what I can take responsibility for is how I show up in the world. Not with how I dress, not with how I dress. I'm not even saying that, but I will tell you that as I started to get more healed, when I was more healed and I started to show up in the world differently with a different kind of energy, I don't experience those things now. Even though I am meeting, oh, I can't hear you.
I was just saying because you don't attract those things anymore.
Yes. And even if I'm still meeting the same kind, like I can still see the same kind of individuals. Like I can see them around me, but I am not the likely target because I'm showing up differently, because my boundaries are different, because the energy that I have when I walk into the room is different. And instead of Shauntelya with her head down, unsure, ready to say yes to whatever anybody had to say, it's a different kind of Shauntelya. If you're coming over here, you need to come over here correctly with respect. I'm going to talk to you with respect. You're going to talk to me with respect. We're going to have a respectful exchange. And then when we're done doing what we have to do, we're going to keep it moving. And that wasn't how I was able to show up in the world before, because I had been so small for so long and so desperate to be seen, to be validated, to be heard, to be enough. And that started when I was that tiny little girl stuck at the top of them stairs. The pattern had started all the way from then. And I had done therapy before. I had done therapy to address the here and the now when I had issues. I addressed the here and the now. And it wasn't until I really started looking at some of the patterns that I had from way back then. Like, how did they get there? How did that pattern get there? Why is it so ingrained that I was able to move past it? Like, who do I need to, what part of me is still begging for this validation? Sometimes we don't realize that where that need is coming from. Well, I can't say I didn't realize where the need was coming from. I didn't realize how broken some parts of me were until I was able to put them back together.
That is amazing, girl. Is your mom, did she ever start her healing journey?
Yes.
You guys are
And
all
and for her, so imagine that I was only with my grandmother for a short amount of time. She had a lifetime with this woman. Like, this woman raised her.
Did you ever
So
ask her why her? I mean, I know they had to send you ahead. Was that the only reason? Because
they sent all of our siblings. It wasn't just me, it was all of us. And it was a chance for them to escape poverty. They were trying to get out of poverty. And when we moved to Oregon and my parents were reunited with us, they got really good jobs. I grew up solidly middle class. I had a solid middle class life, like grew up hiking, camping, hunting, fishing, crabbing. My parents were able to provide most of the things that we wanted and everything that we needed. And I can't say that we would have had those same things. I still had a mother who was dealing with her own trauma. I still had a dad who he's still like, my dad is, he's still his own man, and he's my father. Like, as adults, I'm a full grown woman. I know that I have my own issues outside of me just being my child's parent. So there's still that dynamic that exists in everybody's family, but we didn't have the poverty on top of that I feel like we would have had to endure had we stayed in our home state,
yeah,
our original state.
yeah, I feel like everything happens for a reason, and the pain we go through, even that was for this today, like for us to go out and be that resource and vessel. What tools could you share for other women that are going into their healing journey and have to go back and relive some of these things? What do you suggest they start with? I know you mentioned like accountability. How does
Yeah.
someone Yeah, how does someone get there, and what do we do? Like, what tools could we use to relive those safely?
I feel like the most important thing, the first thing, is developing self-awareness. I think that before you can be accountable to yourself for something, you have to have an awareness of what you're being accountable for. I think becoming more self-aware. And in order to do that, you do have to spend time sitting with your emotions. Like, you have to let them come up and exist. You have to give them space to be whatever they are. So if you're angry, sit there with that anger. Sit there with the anger and breathe through it. And continue to breathe. And you can put a timer, set a timer on your phone or whatever you want to do. Don't play any music. Don't attach any music to the moment, because then that music will be the anthem and the theme song that you play. Every time you hear the song, you'll be thinking about why somebody made you mad, and you'll be
Yeah,
triggered.
that's good advice. Yeah. Yeah. Sit alone in silence. Sit with yourself in silence and learn how to breathe. I tell people learn how to breathe, because when I first start my meditation sessions, I'm like, let's just practice breathing. And they're like, like, no, deepest breath of the day. Like, you have to learn to, people forget how to breathe
Yes,
correctly.
yes, yep.
Yeah.
I would say that that's a big thing. Breathing, that is a huge thing. Anytime you feel stress in your body, anytime you feel tense, your jaw's tense, breathe. Breathing, making space for your emotions. The other tidbit I like to tell people is life is the longest thing that you will ever do. It is the
Mm,
longest thing that you will ever do. You have time. There is time for this. And as you're going through the process, give yourself time. Take your time. Slow down your time. Slow down your breath. Slow down your thoughts. Slow down your quickness to come to any kind of conclusion. Give yourself time and grace. Give it to yourself first. Be kind to yourself first. Forgive yourself first. Give yourself that little bit extra first. When something doesn't go right, doesn't go planned, doesn't go well, whatever it is, whatever your thought process is, give that little piece of it's okay, the pat on the back, the hug that you need, that little bit of encouragement, give it to yourself first. Become more self-aware, learn to breathe, make space for your emotions, give yourself more time, and give yourself grace. It is because life is the longest thing that you will ever do, and healing is a journey, and you don't wake up one day completely healed. This is a skill that you keep fresh. You are constantly keeping it fresh, and you know it. You keep it fresh all the time because there's going to be things that come up, and you got to take a breath. You got to slow it down, and you have to some things you just have to let it be. And I had to learn to do that. And I found that I didn't have as many triggers as I thought I did.
yeah.
I really didn't.
Sorry, one second. I'm so
Cutie.
yeah. So he's settled. I'm sorry. Well, he's not. He's crying for me, but it's okay. He's with me all day.
Yeah.
I'm
So those are my tidbits. I don't know how much time we got. We're 35 minutes in.
35 minutes. We have 10 more minutes.
Okay. What other tidbits would I give? I would say, I would definitely say set boundaries for women, any woman who is working on herself and she's starting to do the work. Being accountable to yourself is a huge piece. And learning to set boundaries and then taking action on those boundaries that you set, like you set a boundary, there are conditions that you place on other people, and you're saying they are conditions that you're not placing on people, but you're saying to the other person, if these things happen, I'm going to remove myself from this situation, that this is the limit of what I'm willing to engage with. And then you follow through with that. And that's you being accountable. You follow through with that. That's the limit of what you're willing to engage with. But while you're doing all of this stuff, you're becoming more self-aware, you're giving yourself grace, and you're learning to set boundaries. You have to pour into yourself. You have to start taking care of yourself so that you definitely feel like you know what you're setting boundaries for. Like you feel like you have something worthwhile to protect. If you were somebody who has gone through a lot of things in the beginning, this idea of setting boundaries, of telling people no when you've made it your life to people please, is why it is a wild concept, because the thing that makes you happy is pouring into other people, doing stuff for other people, making your life about other people. I guess so. This is what I'm trying to say. When you start to set boundaries around things that bring you joy. This is what I want. This is what I want to say. Boundaries around things that bring you joy, just you joy. And that's not selfish. That's you realizing who you are, what you want, and what you value, separate from anyone else. And I promise you, those things are not going to be as complicated as people think they are. It's not going to be as expensive as you think it is. Taking care of yourself often, they are tiny little things. And what it's going to boil down to is the time that you pour into yourself. It's the time that you were giving yourself undivided attention. And I can say some of those activities for me, excuse me, tea. I love tea.
Me
But
too.
putting a nice cup of tea, you have tea too? Putting
Yeah.
a nice cup of tea together. I love putting a nice cup of tea together. It feels like I'm doing something so
For your
posh. Like,
Yeah.
yes,
It's small and it's little, just little. That's what I say. I'm like, just get into like little habits in the morning when I'm making my coffee and just smelling it warm up, or just you just for you, like you said. And people don't have, they're in this like survival mode where they can't pause and see those little things that they're able to do because they're stuck on the things that they feel stagnant in. It's like all this
yes,
can really change if you just pour into yourself instead of giving it out into the world first. And that seems hard and like easier said than done because we've been through it. But it's like once you start, you get on a rhythm of things. Like you're able to say no quicker, honor your boundaries with people. You're able to I tell people as you go along and people things come up that you have to heal again, readjust those boundaries. They don't always have to stay the same for just that one
no,
person. Adjust them as you go because they're going to learn from your experience as well and your boundaries, and it's going to be inspiring. But if you meet those people where it's that, jealousy of your healing journey, then set those boundaries that maybe they can't go where you're going.
mhm,
Because
mhm.
this will take you places where you're just like, I can really have a life like this for just taking care of myself. Like you can, you really
Yes.
can. It's there.
One of the things that I noticed when I started to like pour into myself, set better boundaries so that I had the time to pour into myself. And I started to get to know myself. I started to get to know like what it was that I liked,
Yeah.
um, the things that I enjoyed. And it was not like leaving my house all the time to like I used to like to go get my nails and stuff done. And I really honestly thought like I thought, oh, this is self-care. Now that time, the commute to go do that, that's taking time away from me. Like that's
Right?
taking time away from me where I yes,
Yeah,
where
it's
I
like
can
you love spending time with yourself. When you get on this healing journey, I love being alone now. I couldn't stand it in the past. I got so much anxiety, but I'm like, I'm gonna go out by the lake and just sit there and just write and journal. And even my spiritual health has gotten so healthy where like God told me before my prayers to start listening to worship music. Like you just hear your spirit doing things, right? And
yes,
I'm just like, I'm okay, like okay, okay, okay. And literally he introduced me to praise dance. And
yes.
oh, now I go out by the lake and praise dance, and that, like, I'm like,
I
"God,
bet you feel so alive.
no." Yes!
I bet you do.
Girl. I
It's
got
like
there
a
with, like,
whole
and there's a
other
big lake. It's literally like we're in an apartment, but it's like this is how I didn't look at this blessing when I started my healing journey in this apartment, and I would be like, "Oh, I'm always home," because my husband's like, "Just be home and I know you have to be with the kids, but, like, do you really wanna work?" And I thought about it and thought about some more, start looking, and I was like, "I don't feel like I'm just meant to be there." Like, it was just miserable to work at, like, a call center. It was I've done that, and I've been a hairdresser, but I couldn't get the license transferred here because it just costs so much. Um, I'm in Missouri and my license is in Florida. So I'm like, I'll just pause. We're having kids. Let's just raise them at home. Sorry, but there was always just this but gratitude because I'm like, I have clients that have lost their children. So that helped me heal to be more patient with them and enjoy those moments that we really can't we God, we're disposable. Like we can wake up and won't hear this. So I really started to just appreciate things. And as I started doing that, I'm like, oh, there's a lake, I'm like, look, we're at our surroundings. Like we have land. So I go on walks with them now.
yes.
I go and praise dance and they think that like it's fun because the flag. So they chase it and they get their energy out. And it's just like God will make everything flow together. Like it's just been
There's so much
such
less resistance. You said it right there, the flow. When you are on the right path, when things are going, when you were where you were supposed to be, things will flow. And this goes with setting boundaries. This goes with having a fulfilled life. This goes with career. This goes with anything. When you were on the path that you were supposed to be on, things will flow. There will not be so much resistance. If you were hitting resistance after resistance after resistance, I know our culture teaches you to push through. And I come from a military background. Cool, you push through, drive hard, go hard. But no,
yeah.
no, A lot of times, often, that is an indicator that you should find an alternate route.
Yes, yes, you're
An
not on the same
alternate
path.
route.
It's like God's like push you, and I tell everyone, I say God, I'm like, they can use universe, whatever they believe in, but there is something in you that is telling you, hey, not this way. Hey,
Yes.
take a turn. Hey, it should be like my last guest, she said it felt like she was being pulled by her hair. Like literally, like she felt it. She was just like, it was just like this nasty urge of just tightness and just trying to pull her in. And then I'm like, look at like we met one time or a few times, like she's like one of those play cousins, so I met her a
Yeah.
few times, but it just came full circle that like she performed at Essence Fest. Like
Oh,
we're
wow.
just yes, like I'm like I want to I've and that's been my dream to always go there. So I'm like just things are aligning, and I tell everyone, I'm like, even when people come on here, I know it's God ordained just because of where I'm at in life, and then the people who come on here where they're at, it's like it's such an alignment that I feel like we are, she said it best, she said we made it to the other side of earth. Like that's what it feels like there's another there's another side over here where it's freedom. It's not monetary, it's not, worry, it's not anxiety, it's just flow, like with what we have.
You gotta, when you were talking, I was thinking, be like water, move like water, like and the doors keep opening. Like when you were talking about the guests that you have, like things are in alignment, things are flowing and they're moving, and you are attracting the people that you're supposed to attract. And I feel blessed to have ended up on this podcast, to have this conversation with you. I really do. I do.
I'm blessed to have you. You don't, as you were talking, I'm like, this is such good content. And I say content because we're in this digital world, and I feel like it's a blessing to be able to go on the internet and search for anything. Your voice is your story is going to help so many other women. I'm sorry, I did this live for my TikTok already, 1,200 likes.
There you go.
Like just from just your voice, and just people are really listening, and people need this because although it's like it's coming easy for me now, but when I talk about it with other people, it's not so easy. They're just like, I'm like, start basics, breathe, then journal, then walk, and then you'll just do that consistently, at least for a month, I would say, and grow your spiritual health, whatever that looks like.
That's a big piece. When people are healing, I don't think that people realize that there's the physical part of you that is hurting, but there's another part of you, whether whatever you want to call it, there's a spiritual part of you, your soul, your energy, whatever you want to call it, the part that animates your body and gives you life, that is also, it needs to be healed. It is going on that journey with you. And this is why self-care is so important. This is why doing things like what you're talking about, the walk, the praise dancing, these things that bring you utter joy, just joy, lean into those things. Those are the things that you have to lean into. Those are the things you have to make space for.
I love that. I'm going to I feel like we should end it with that. That was the wisdom right there. Like, yes, lean, and that's what I felt like even when he's like I changed the name to my podcast. It was Dear Mama, Hi Daddy, because I was going through that mother wound. I'm like, I don't know why I'm on here. I just want to use this as my talk therapy. As I went through it, things just start happening with my content where I'm like, it actually shifted my life where I posted my sexual assault because I'm like, I'm just tired of holding it in. Like, how can that was like my way of it was liberating, and it was also like validating because other women went through it and they were so encouraging. I never heard someone say, I believe you until that post.
That's
Literally all
big.
the comments. Yeah.
That's
And
big.
yeah.
That's
And
big.
I'm like, thank you. And so with that, his family kind of harassed me. I was like, well, why don't you go to, report it? And as a little girl, we don't know these things. So I'm like, I was still stuck in that little girl mode. I'm like, I'm a grown woman. Like, let me. And they were saying how Biden eliminated the statute of limitations so I could report it like anytime. Anybody who's been sexually assaulted can report it now because Biden literally lifted it in 2022 when I literally made that post at the end of the year, and I did not know that. So I'm like,
Are
it,
you ready to report that?
I
Are you
already
ready?
did. I already
You
went through.
did.
Yeah. I went through that process because people were like, it was literally guided, and that's how I got therapy. That's how I got there. I got therapy before, but I was just like, I tell people, if you don't like that therapist, just keep switching until you see someone that's a fit. No one was ever a fit for me. Um, but when I got that therapy, it was through the Trauma Resilience Center, and they have like a foundation, like when you report it, like just free therapy for all, right? Like to see to see if you, because it's a cold case, do you want to go through the court process? And I did. I went through it. I talked to the investigator. He investigated it. He went to jail. Both of them went to jail because it was more of like a sex trafficking thing because it was his cousin, and I had to be vulnerable with all of this. Like literally, God's sense of humor. It's like I am such an introvert, and He's like, "You're gonna be loud on this one. You're gonna be loud." God loves public displays. That's what I'm seeing more and more of. And so when I reported, I met my therapist Elena, and 3 months in, she was bringing her journal. I was bringing my journal. We were meditating together. And she's like, "You don't need therapy anymore. And you just need to go and let people experience you and your story." And so I was like, I already had started she was encouraging that. And she's like, wow. She's like, she's like, I just said it. And she's like, you said it like it was just nothing. Like it takes a lot to do what you're doing. And,
It really does.
yeah,
It really does. And being vulnerable takes a lot of bravery, and being vulnerable about something like that is incredible. That's incredible.
it was so much healing to where I'm like, when we got to court and they dismissed it with prejudice, so they can or without, I can't remember the wording, but so they can bring the charges up later, because there was just
Without
so,
prejudice.
yeah, without prejudice. And so during that and after, I'm just like, him sitting in jail and going through that process of him getting that scared and it not being a secret, my secret anymore, don't tell her I'm your best friend, the creepy stuff he would say, I journaled out, I was able to release, heal. I literally going through that process. I remember there was a moment my stomach was just hurting, cramping because I got so much anxiety, and I stepped into the shower, and I know this is TMI, but a bunch of blood fell out. Like I started my period, and I'm like, that was, and I looked at it, and my therapist was like, everything's a sign. It's not survival, like you're okay. You don't need to go to the doctor. I had seen, it was the day I was meeting with my therapist on virtual because she was in Denver. And she's like, just breathe through. And when we did that first meditation, that's when I was like, I remember doing this with my grandmother. I remember my grandfather playing those affirmations, like old school, like this is my lineage. And it was such a connection that I was meditating every day afterward, to where it became my business. Like God, I literally prayed one day and meditated, and God was like, pray, but I want you to cut, like I was hearing all these directions. I put the cover over my head, I got my head to the ground, and I just start praying. And and he told me to bring my journal to my prayer sessions. I literally put the Healing Homegirls and Jasmine's Home, my business names. And it was just like I was coming up and just writing it. And I was like, when you plan your business with God, that
You
whole
are in
experience is
alignment.
so healing. I don't even wanna take him to court anymore. I mean, to finish the process, because 'cause I'm like, that's going backward. I just needed that to come up to heal in any way it had to come up, and that was the content, the encouragement, the world seeing his face, for his family seeing his face. Maybe they can keep their children away from, there was just things that I'm like, no, there's God's wrath, where that let him have some of that accountability, because I stayed stagnant in my sex life, in my healing, in the relationship, that just all of it. Everyone saying I was fast and promiscuous, to really take my power back and say, no, I was uncomfortable. I didn't want this. This is what happened. I was 13, he was 33. I couldn't make those decisions. Yeah. Yeah. I know they're no. And as my son start getting older and having friends around, I'm like, that's nasty. Like that really did it for me, is seeing my son age. I was like, no, 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 I have to do something about this. I have to really, so in my advocacy for it, um, that's where I got my power back. I'm just like, I don't even want to revisit court. I don't want to see his face. I don't, everything happened how it needed to happen. And I'm here now to just be there for others in any way I can, be that vessel.
And you are empowering women, and your story is empowering. And I am floored.
Yeah.
I am floored. And you're able to talk about it in a way that I can tell that you have come a long way. You have healed. You are able to talk about it freely. And that's what people need to see and hear. They need to see. I used to think, I asked myself a lot of times, what was the point of me telling my story? And listening to you tell your story, I can appreciate again why it's important for women to tell stories like this, why it's important for us to tell our stories, because people need to see examples of what it looks like to get to the other side. I People always say you're going to be okay, you're going to be okay, and when you're hurting, that's not something you really want to hear. But it's good when you are ready to accept that okay is going to happen. Sometimes you want to know, what is okay going to look like? Who got to okay?
Mm.
You got past okay, but do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
people want to see, like, if it's going to be okay, then how good can it get? Like,
yeah. It gets good.
who
It
did
gets
it?
to the point where like I smile through the story now. Like they're like, and I'm like, no, it's I say that it had to happen, like, what else can I do? I can stay in it and say all this bad stuff happened, and yes, it was bad, and I'm not going to I just feel for my story too in hearing other sexual assault stories and being that advocate. I was older. It wasn't someone in my family, not that that means it's worse or, better, but to me, um I don't know, it just seemed I think a 5-year-old and a 14-year-old, it depending on what age your trauma happens, to go back and relive those things, you kinda with the mindset you have, you kinda can heal that person because of their mindset, you can relive that. So if you have to go back to that 5-year-old and to go to that 5-year-old, they are you were immature at 5, so it's like you really have to, like, talk to that 5-year-old. I had to just talk to my 13-year-old self, and at that, I was already mature because they don't have school buses in high school. I traveled by bus and train. So when you get those opportunities as a kid, you really live. Like I was literally traveling from Denver to Loveland, like the mountains, and just chilling on a mountain at 13 years old, like an hour on the bus, just going. Like I just did stuff like that. So dangerous. Would not recommend anyone do that. But my spirit just always, I felt like I was always in tune before the trauma. And now after I'm just going back to who I was, going back and identity surfing of my true traits and living through them. I was kind. I am kind. I lived with peace. I lived with a lot of energy. And I just want to live in those things now. I want that energy back. And so I'm able to just pour that back into myself now.
Yeah,
So
pour that back into yourself. Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, I love it.
Thank you. But this was an amazing experience. My children are wanting me right now. I hear them. But I thank you so much for coming on the Healing Homegirls podcast. I really appreciate your story. You're beautiful. Oh, and how can people reach you when they want to do the life coaching with you? How does that process work? Your social medias?
You can go to www.weaveronesourcecoaching.com. I don't know when you put this up on your site, if you can, we might be able to throw a link in the
Yeah,
comments.
I'll put the link in the show notes. And I also do promotion on my TikTok and my Instagram so also I need about 3 pictures of you, just so I can do those. And then I share the content. So you'll be getting the edited. That's another thing why I love doing this, because I feel like that's me blessing, putting that out there. So you'll get the edited audio, visual, and the promotional pictures that I do. I'll send it all to your email.
Fantastic. But they can reach me at weaveronesourcecoaching.com, and there's a site to book a discovery call. We can have a conversation and figure out how we can get you looking at where you want to be.
Love that.
Let's see. Thank you.
Thank you so much.